If you spend any time on the internet these days, you'll never be wanting for controversy. There's so many brain dead takes that you see on Twitter, and the gaming discourse is just absolutely gutter trash at this point. There are definitely real criticisms of game companies. There are definitely stupid practices that we're seeing all the time. But what I'm seeing with this new Assassin's Creed game, I'm not even a fan of the series. I don't particularly think that the games, at least the ones they've made recently, I don't think they're of good quality. But people are taking a shit on this new Assassin's Creed Shadow for all of the wrong reasons. The controversy surrounding Yasuke and his inclusion as the protagonist of this new game is really only, I have to say it, it's only for one reason. It's because the guy is depicted as being black. Now listen, I'm not a fan of forced DEI inclusions in games. I don't think you should just have, well, I don't need to get into that. It's for obvious reasons. I think if you're going to have a character, you should have a good reason. It doesn't matter what they look like as long as they have some kind of personality and characterization. But of course, people are, well, they seem to be going against this because they want Assassin's Creed to be historically accurate, or they have this make-believe idea, this paranoia, that the only reason they're going with a black character is because they're trying to push some agenda. And this is just completely ignorant of history. Also, I would point out, why are people not complaining about a woman? There's probably a higher likelihood of someone like Yasuke having been prominent in this time period than, say, a female samurai, or female combatant. Not to say that there might not have been, but that seems even less likely than a dude who they imported from, some would say Africa, some would say India. That part is not entirely clear because we don't have his full backstory. But there's very little contention about the major events that have been depicted in so many other stories. If you're actually interested in history, and particularly if you're interested in fantasy, you can have both. What got me really interested in the Sengoku era, which is probably the most depicted era in feudal Japanese history. You have most of the samurai films are based on the Sengoku period, and a lot of the games as well, because this is a crucial time in Japanese history where all of the warring factions, you could call it the Civil War of the time, there were a lot of people that were contending for the throne, and it's the story of Oda and then later Hideyoshi, and this is all depicted in Dynasty Warriors and a lot of other games, and my favorite, Nioh. And of course, Yasuke makes an appearance in both the first Nioh, with a slightly different timeline, and in Nioh 2, which is set primarily during the rise and fall of Lord Oda. Yasuke, he makes a few appearances as both a NPC and as a boss fight, and what is pretty much uncontested in historical documents is that he was there when, this is a spoiler for the Japanese lore, but Yasuke was there when Lord Oda committed seppuku because he was betrayed by one of his vassals, and rather than allowing himself to be captured or tortured or what have you, he burned his castle, as was customary. I mean, he went all out. He destroyed his castle at Honoji, and he died along with his wife, I believe. And you can see, as depicted in the events of the game, you will meet Yasuke outside of the castle ruins. He was seen there. I believe it was written by Louis Froisch, or one of his Jesuits that followed along with him. Froisch was, of course, the chief historian whose writings and texts are the basis for much of what we know about this era of history. And I mean, this is an eyewitness. These are eyewitness accounts from the time period. So much of what we know is surviving from Luis's texts. And I just don't understand why suddenly people are making a big deal out of Yasuke as if he hasn't been in so many other depictions, at least in video games. And these are, by the way, video games made by actual Japanese developers. And the importance of understanding the context of Yasuke is that, first of all, there may have been other foreigners, or there may have been other warriors of foreign descent like him. And of course, William Adams would come into the picture a few years later after all these events had transpired. But the very important context of Yasuke is that it is very widely accepted that one of the reasons that Oda became the emperor, essentially, although Hideyoshi would consolidate a bit more power and for a longer period, Oda introduced a couple of very unique and innovative strategies to help win his battles. I believe he was the first feudal lord of that time period to introduce firearms, because before the firearms were introduced from the Portuguese settlers that came, Portuguese were the first to discover Japan from Europe, at least. They brought firearms, and although firearms were entirely new in battle, um, they proved to be, I think, of course, the skilled marksmen with bows and arrows, they would still be formidable, but the fact that you could bypass the training and just give guns to people had helped him expedite his campaign. But the other important aspect that made Oda different is that he was not against whoever you might be, wherever you came from. It didn't matter what your status was, because this is a man that was born into the nobility, sort of, but he had to fight back against his siblings in order to kind of consolidate his own clan's authority. He did not care really where you came from. He did not stick his nose up at soldiers. This is kind of how the story of Hideyoshi, who was a peasant. Of course, Hideyoshi had to prove himself time and time again in order to rise through the ranks and earn the trust and respect of Oda. And here's another just a very important thing to mention. There are elements of this time period, there are kind of fantastical, almost unbelievable elements like the mysterious one-night castle that was built by Hideyoshi, which is something that really happened, although he didn't build, the biggest castle that the world has ever seen, but he built a military outpost all in one night, which helped them to secure. It served as the outpost for the siege of Inebayama Castle. So there are crazy things that happened during this time period. You're never going to know precisely the details of exactly of everything. There's a whole lot of other things that you could call into question. I really don't understand why Yasuke in particular is being called into question, because the likelihood of his existence, first of all, it's essentially confirmed if we're going to believe what we know to be true from all the other writings. There's no reason that Yasuke would be an outlier other than if you're making it about his place of origin. There's no real reason to dispute his existence or other people like him existing. And so I don't think people are actually interested in history. I think history is very important. I think if you care about the magnitude of Japanese history and Japanese culture, particularly this very awesome time period, the Sengoku period, very, very awesome to see the movies and the games based off of it. I mean, this is the era of the samurai. Before, there are some ninjas as well, but this is really the height of the samurai. This is the height of people like Shibata. If you've ever seen Seven Samurai or Ugetsu and other classic Japanese samurai films, you're going to hear about all these people. Maybe Yasuke isn't at the forefront of all of that, of course, but he is definitely historic. He's historically accurate. We may not know all of the details about his past. Some things may be a little contested, but I mean, ultimately, let's pretend that if there are embellishments throughout history, okay. I mean, I don't understand why the outrage isn't concerned with Neo. No one is saying that the Japanese developers for other games should apologize. No one even cares about this issue. I understand that Ghost of Tsushima, they take historical liberties with that game as well. I guess they still have, Japanese characters, but I mean, it's not entirely historical truth. It's historical fiction for the most part. I just don't understand the outrage over Yasuke. I think there's a lot of people that have no idea that he's been in other media, and if they knew that, then they wouldn't be trying to make something out of nothing. Ultimately, I think he's probably an interesting idea. For a character, I have no idea if the new Assassin's Creed is going to be any good. It looks a bit more interesting. I think some people are just, I don't know. I think people are listening to the wrong people. I don't think any of these critics have any historical background. You can read all kinds of threads. There are good threads on Reddit. If you can translate Portuguese, and you can read the works of Luis Frois. So the evidence is out there, and even if you want to be a skeptic, the other games are out there too. You can always play Neo, which will be, I think the definitive samurai game probably ever made, or samurai themed game ever made. You can go and play that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with the way they mix fantasy and reality. It's a video game ultimately, so I don't know why, out of all of the things to be critical of, this is not one of them. So I think Yasuke's real. I have no reason to really doubt it. You can doubt so many things about history. Life is too short to worry about all of the particulars. I think if the Japanese have been confident in using him, then that's enough for me to believe in. So I just don't understand why people are so obtuse about these kinds of things. It's just a video game ultimately, and it's not anything unheard of. And I think that's just a misconception that they've invented someone who didn't exist, as if he hasn't been talked about and shown before. So I would say consider that. Consider doing your own research and looking at the evidence that's been put forth. And Twitter's just stupid. Twitter just stays dumb, it seems like.